Labeled an ugly high school grad and disowned by my family 10 years later, I met them at my sister's wedding. 10 years is a long time to pretend something never happened. But the second I saw the envelope with Olivia's name on it, scrawled in her bubbly, oversized cursive, I knew pretending was exactly what they'd been doing. 10 years since I was kicked out. 10 years since I spoke to my father. 10 years of silence that echoed louder every time I passed by a mirror and still saw that angry, humiliated version of myself staring back. And now here it was. A wedding invitation. For my sister. Like we were just any normal family. Like nothing had ever happened. The RSVP was still blank. I'd stared at it for 3 days, flipping it over in my hands, rereading the date and location until it became meaningless. I knew the place. Of course I knew it. They were holding it at the church my father practically owned. Not legally, but in spirit. Pastor James, beloved family man, pillar of the community. The man who built a reputation on virtue while burying his own filth beneath the church floorboards and layers of performative prayer. The man who told the congregation I'd lost my way when I told the truth. I set the invitation down and looked at the folder on my desk. It was thick, worn at the edges, stuffed with copies, photos, letters, all the things I'd gathered over the years. The evidence. The kind no one wanted to see back then. The kind that turned family into enemies and silence into survival. I hadn't planned on using it. Not for this. But seeing Olivia's smiling face on that cardstock, standing next to the man she was about to marry, the caption, "Blessed to be unbroken," beneath it. I couldn't stop the bile from rising. Blessed to be unbroken. What a goddamn joke. I wasn't invited because they'd forgiven me. I wasn't invited because things had changed. I was invited because they wanted to pretend. Because having a wedding without the older sibling would look bad. Because image was everything to people like my father. I drove to the venue alone. The folder rode in the passenger seat like a passenger I didn't want but couldn't let go of. Every bump in the road made it shift, whispering at me. I kept my eyes on the road. I wasn't sure if I was going to walk in, hand Olivia her gift, and leave, or if I was finally going to open the folder and burn it all to the ground. But I knew this wasn't about reconciliation. When I arrived, the lot was full. Suits and dresses and polite smiles. People I hadn't seen in a decade turning and pausing when they recognized me. Most looked away. A few offered half-hearted nods. No one said my name. I didn't expect them to. I wasn't one of them anymore. Maybe I never was. Inside, the church looked the same. Polished pews, floral arrangements, the altar spotless and gleaming. My father stood near the front, grinning and shaking hands like nothing had ever touched him. He didn't see me, not yet. I stayed near the back, clutching the folder under my arm, and watched him. Pastor James. Man of God. Liar. Abuser. Hypocrite. I was 13 when I found the first letter. It was in his desk, addressed to a woman who wasn't my mother. The language was intimate, careful. Over the years, more surfaced. Messages on his burner phone. Notes from counseling sessions he claimed to be running. One night, I followed him. That was the night everything fell apart. I told my mother. She told him. He told the church. And then he told me to leave. They believed him. They always believed him. Olivia was 16 when it happened. She cried the first week I was gone. Then stopped calling. Eventually blocked my number. I wasn't surprised. She worshipped him the way kids worship stars, too far away to really see the flaws. But I always wondered if part of her knew. If part of her had seen the cracks in his sermons. And now here she was, at the front of the aisle, walking in on my mother's arm, radiant and smiling like a woman who had never buried a sibling's betrayal inside her wedding dress. When they asked if anyone had any objections, the room went still. I didn't speak. Not because I didn't want to. Because it wasn't time. Not yet. Later, at the reception, Olivia found me. She didn't hug me. Didn't smile. She looked like she was holding her breath. "You came," she said. I did. There was a pause, and she glanced down at the folder in my hands. "That what I think it is?" "It's everything," I said. She nodded slowly. Her voice cracked a little. "You're not going to do it here, are you?" "No," I said. "Not here." Another pause. She looked away, blinking hard, then back at me. "I wasn't ready then." "I know. I'm still not sure I am." "I didn't come for you," I said. "I came because I needed to see if it was still the same." "And is it?" "It's worse." She nodded again. No tears. Just resignation. Like a woman watching a storm she'd been warned about for years finally roll in. "You'll do what you need to do," she said. "I know that now." And she walked away. I left before dinner. The folder sat on the seat beside me again, heavier than before. But this time it wasn't whispering. It was waiting. Growing up, people always assumed I had it easy just because my house had white columns, a manicured lawn, and a driveway big enough for 3 European cars. We were that family, the one with the Christmas lights that made it into the neighborhood newsletter, the one with matching outfits for professional portraits, the one everyone whispered about like we were a magazine spread come to life. My father was a cardiothoracic surgeon with a resume that read like a brag sheet and a wardrobe that looked straight out of a luxury catalog. My mother, on the other hand, was what you'd call a classic socialite. Always dressed to the nines, even if she was just heading to the country club to drink mimosas and feign interest in charity auctions she barely remembered signing up for. On paper, we were perfect. But paper burns easy. What most people didn't see was what happened once the curtains were drawn and the front door was locked. My father wasn't just married to medicine. He was also married to the idea that rules didn't apply to men like him, men who saved lives by day and betrayed their families by night. I was 10 the first time I figured out something wasn't right. He was supposed to be on call, but I caught him on the back patio late at night, whispering into his phone, telling someone he missed her laugh. At first, I thought it was some old friend or maybe a patient. But then I saw the way he smiled, soft and secretive, like he'd stepped out of our world and into someone else's. That was the first mistress. By the time I hit high school, I'd counted 3. One was a nurse at his hospital. Another was a pharmaceutical rep who once dropped off a gift basket I wasn't supposed to open. The last one was the most obvious. He brought her to a medical conference in Chicago and forgot his Bluetooth was still connected to the kitchen speakers. My mother was passed out drunk on the sofa, so she didn't hear the moaning through the surround sound system. But I did. My mother wasn't exactly innocent either. She had this talent for turning every problem into someone else's fault, usually mine or Amanda's. If the flowers didn't arrive in time for her luncheon, it was because I distracted her with my teenage angst. If my father came home late smelling like a different perfume, she'd polish off half a bottle of Pinot Grigio and say things like, "Boys will be boys," while staring at me like I was somehow the reason her life had gone sideways. Her world was white wine, Pilates, and pretending not to see the lipstick stains on his shirt collars. Most nights, she'd fall asleep on the living room chaise, mascara smudged, phone dangling from her fingers, playing the same voicemail from a friend who sounded just as fake as the rest of her life. The only thing that kept me from completely unraveling was Amanda. She was 2 years older, smarter in a quiet way, with this unshakable calm that made it feel like maybe the world wasn't as chaotic as it seemed. She wasn't perfect, God, no, but she understood things before I could even explain them. Like when I got suspended in middle school for snapping at a teacher who made a comment about discipline at home. Amanda didn't scold me or ask questions. She just walked into my room with a bag of chips and said, "I get it. That's all. I get it." No judgment. No fixing. Just presence. We had this ritual. Every Sunday night after dinner, which was always some cold, fancy meal no one actually wanted to eat, we'd sneak into the attic and sit under the old stained glass window. It was the only part of the house that didn't feel fake. We'd talk about books, music, where we wanted to live someday, places far away from the suffocating silence of our home. She wanted to study art in Florence. I didn't know what I wanted. Just not this. I remember one night, the lights flickered because of a thunderstorm, and the power went out. My mother started screaming from the kitchen, not because she was scared, but because she'd spilled wine on her favorite blouse and couldn't see to clean it. My father was on the phone, whispering again, pacing the hallway like the storm was beneath him. Amanda just looked at me and said, "This family looks like it's built on stone, but it's all glass, and it's already cracking." I didn't say anything, but I knew she was right. It was already breaking. By the time I was old enough to leave, the only reason I stayed as long as I did was Amanda. She was my lighthouse in a home full of shadows. Every time I thought about walking away, I pictured her in that attic, head tilted toward the light, still believing in beauty despite everything. I couldn't abandon that. I couldn't abandon her. But the truth is, our ideal family was a myth we were all too tired to keep pretending to believe. My father kept performing surgeries like nothing was wrong, while his own family bled out. My mother kept pouring wine over the wounds. And Amanda and I, we just held our breath, waiting for someone to notice we were suffocating too. I was 14 the day the lie shattered. It wasn't some dramatic discovery with flashing lights or explosive confrontation. It started quietly, with a forgotten phone left buzzing on the marble counter of our kitchen. My father never left his phone behind, not even for a second, which is probably why I noticed. I wasn't snooping, wasn't looking for anything, but when the screen lit up for the 4th time in under a minute and the name Celia popped up again and again with little hearts next to it, something inside me paused. At first, I thought maybe it was a patient. He was a surgeon, after all. He had a long list of contacts, a schedule too complicated for any of us to understand, and he always used that as the shield. Work, duty, the greater good. But then a message preview came through. "I miss waking up next to you. Same time Friday." My stomach dropped so fast I felt like I'd stepped into an elevator with the cables cut. I remember just standing there, holding the edge of the countertop like it might stop the room from spinning, staring at that tiny message that made everything else tilt sideways. That was the moment the pedestal cracked. I didn't touch the phone. Didn't need to. I'd seen enough. I remember backing out of the room slowly like I might trigger an alarm if I moved too quickly. My hands were shaking. My face felt hot. Everything was wrong. The house felt colder, too quiet, like it was listening. I waited until that night to say anything. I kept going over it in my head, telling myself I had to be wrong, that maybe Celia was some code, some in-joke, some piece of adult business I couldn't understand. But deep down I knew. I'd known something was off for years, even if I couldn't name it. The way he smiled too tightly. The way my mother avoided eye contact when he came home late. The way Amanda used to pause when she heard the garage door, like she was bracing herself for something she never said out loud. I knew. We were sitting in the living room. My father was pretending to read a medical journal, but I could tell he wasn't really looking at the words. My mother was nursing her second glass of Chardonnay, eyes flicking toward the window even though nothing was outside but darkness and the reflection of her own detachment. I spoke without planning it. Who's Celia? The silence that followed was immediate, sharp, like the air had been sucked out of the room. My father looked up slowly, folding the journal with surgical precision. My mother froze mid-sip, her eyes narrowing as if she were trying to decide whether I was joking. "Excuse me," he said. "Calm. Too calm. I saw your phone today," I said, my voice shaking despite everything in me screaming to stay strong. "She said she missed waking up next to you." His jaw tightened. He didn't blink. For a second, I thought he might laugh it off, deny it, spin some lie like he always did. But instead, he stood up. Not quickly, not angrily. Just stood, like a man preparing to execute a task he didn't particularly want to do but would complete with precision anyway. "You need to be very careful about what you say right now," he said. I felt my chest clench. "It's true, isn't it?" I asked, and I swear my voice didn't even sound like mine anymore. It was thinner, younger, smaller than I wanted it to be. He walked toward me slowly, each step a threat. "You don't know what you think you know," he said, and then he slapped me. It wasn't the kind of slap you see in movies. No dramatic wind-up, no slow-motion reaction. It was clean, practiced, surgical, like everything else he did. The sound echoed, sharp against the stone walls, and I stumbled back more from shock than pain. My hand flew to my cheek instinctively, and I tasted blood. I remember blinking at him like I didn't recognize him. Like this man who just struck me wasn't the same one who used to read me bedtime stories or hand me a popsicle after swim practice. But he was. He was exactly that man. That was the problem. "If you say a word of this to anyone," he said, his voice a low snarl, "I will make sure you regret it. Do you understand me?" I didn't respond. Couldn't. I was trying not to cry, trying to hold it in, trying to not give him the satisfaction. That's when I turned to my mother. She was still sitting there, frozen, her glass half raised. I met her eyes, waiting, hoping, pleading for something, anything. Some spark of protection, some maternal instinct, some anger. But she just looked at me like she didn't know me, like I'd broken something by speaking. Then she turned her gaze to her wine and took a slow sip. That silence hurt more than the slap. After that night, the rules changed. No one said anything. Not my father. Not my mother. Amanda wasn't home that weekend. I told myself I'd tell her later. I never did. The bruise on my face faded within days, but something else stayed broken under the surface, something that didn't heal. I still sat at the same dinner table, still answered the same questions at school, still kept the same smile when my father's colleagues came over and called us a picture-perfect family. But I wasn't in the picture anymore. Not really. That was the first blow. Not just the discovery, not just the slap, but realizing that in this house, truth wasn't welcome. And neither was I. My 18th birthday was supposed to be a turning point, and in some twisted way, I guess it was. Not in the way other people get celebrated with balloons and cake and family toasting their next chapter. Mine blew a hole straight through the center of whatever remained of my family and set fire to everything I thought was still salvageable. That day didn't feel like a milestone. It felt like a demolition. It started the same way birthdays always did in our house, sterile. My mother gave me a card with no personal message, just "Happy birthday, love Mom," scribbled beneath the Hallmark font. My father didn't say anything at all in the morning. Too busy with a conference call, or maybe just pretending I didn't exist. He had a long-standing talent for invisibility, at least when it came to emotions, accountability, or birthdays that didn't belong to him. Amanda had texted me from her dorm the night before, promising she'd call later, and that was probably the only part of the day I was actually looking forward to. But even that got lost in the wreckage. My mother insisted we go out to dinner. "It's a tradition," she said, Even though the last few birthdays had been little more than overpriced meals and forced conversation, while they both stared past me like I was a polite obligation. I didn't want to go, but I also didn't want to start another Cold War. I figured if I just sat through it, smiled when required, and said thank you at the end, I could get through it clean. I didn't expect to find him at the restaurant first. I didn't expect to walk in and see my father seated at a dimly lit corner table, holding the hand of a woman who wasn't my mother. He didn't see me at first. His back was to the door, but I knew that silhouette like I knew my own name. Straight shoulders, tailored blazer, the way he nodded as if he was listening even when he wasn't. The woman leaned in, laughing, her mouth close to his ear, her nails tracing slow patterns on his wrist. And that was it. That was the last inch of rope snapping. All the quiet swallowing I'd done over the years. All the bruises buried beneath polite silence. All the nights I held Amanda in that attic while pretending things would get better. They all rose up at once and came out of my mouth like I wasn't even in control of it anymore. Is this your new family, Dad? Heads turned. Conversation stopped. The clink of glass and silverware froze midair. The woman across from him blinked, confused, then glanced between us like she had just realized she was part of a scene she didn't sign up for. My father turned slowly, and the moment our eyes met, something flickered across his face. Not shock, not guilt, just annoyance, like I was interrupting something beneath him. I said. I repeated, louder this time. Is this your new family? Or is this just one of the many replacements you've been collecting behind Mom's back? My mother had just walked in and saw us standing there. Me, trembling and seething, him with that cold, tight jaw, and the woman, still trying to gather her purse. People were whispering now. Someone pulled out their phone. The hostess was hovering nearby, unsure whether to intervene or call the manager. And I didn't care. I wanted it all to burn. For years, you've lied to us, I said, stepping closer. You think a suit and a diploma can cover up what you are? You think hiding behind prayer and prestige makes you immune? Enough, he snapped, rising from his seat. No, I said, my voice cracking but louder than ever. You don't get to decide what's enough anymore. You've made our lives a performance so long you actually believe the script. But I'm done playing my part. He grabbed my arm. Hard. Dug his fingers in the same way he used to when I was younger and didn't know better than to flinch. You're embarrassing yourself, he said through clenched teeth. We'll talk about this at home. I'm not going home, I said, loud enough for everyone to hear. I don't belong in a house built on lies. That was the final straw. He let go, his face red now, not with shame, but with fury. You want to be an adult? Fine. Get out. You're not my son anymore. My mother didn't say anything. She just turned her back like she was watching someone else's child fall apart. And that was that. No screaming match. No apology. Just dismissal. I was no longer part of the picture, and they were more relieved than devastated. He pulled out his wallet, slapped $500 on the table like that would somehow patch over the collapse of everything he destroyed, and said, That's more than you deserve. Don't come back. I took the money, not out of gratitude, but because I knew I'd needed to get away from them. That night, I walked out of that restaurant with nothing but the cash in my pocket and the weight of 18 years of buried truth finally breaking the surface. I didn't have a bag. I didn't have a plan. I just had the last words I said to him echoing in my head, louder than the sound of the door closing behind me. I'm not coming back. And someday, everyone will know who you really are. And I meant every word. The night I walked out of that restaurant with $500 and nothing else, I didn't cry. I didn't scream or beg or second guess. I walked until my legs gave out. And then I sat on a bench outside a gas station and watched people come and go, their lives moving on while mine felt like it had just slammed into a wall at full speed. I remember staring at the buzzing fluorescent light overhead, the way it flickered like it couldn't decide whether to stay alive or shut down, and thinking, same. That night I promised myself two things. 1, I would survive, no matter how hard it got. And 2, I would make sure they never forgot what they'd thrown away. The first few weeks were a blur. I couch hopped when I could, slept in libraries, laundromats, and for 2 straight nights, in the stairwell of a closed community center where the heat still ran on a timer. My pride was the only thing heavier than my backpack. I refused to call Amanda. She was the only one who might have helped, but I needed to do this on my own. I couldn't let anyone say I had to be rescued. I couldn't give them that. I got my first job washing dishes at a diner that didn't ask too many questions. Minimum wage, cash under the table, burns on my forearms from the industrial sprayer, and shifts that stretched into the early morning. I'd pocket whatever leftovers I could without getting caught. Half a sandwich, a stale muffin, once an entire tray of scrambled eggs someone forgot to toss. It wasn't dignity, but it was survival. I showered at a YMCA downtown using a guest pass I borrowed from a kid I'd met at the diner. I kept my clothes in a trash bag in the back of a locker, rotating outfits so I didn't look like I was living on the edge of collapse. But I was. Every single day. The thing that kept me going, more than anything, was that fire inside me. The slow, burning, corrosive rage that they thought they'd broken me. That they thought $500 was enough to erase 18 years. That they thought I'd disappear. So I started applying to colleges. Not out of hope, not because I believed I'd get in, but because I needed something that wasn't this. I filled out every form I could find on the public library computers, printed essays I wrote between shifts, and sent them off with fingers crossed and stomach hollow. When the acceptance came, it felt unreal. A local state college. Nothing fancy. No ivy-covered buildings or lecture halls with chandeliers. But it was a start. It was mine. I took that letter and stared at it for hours, sitting on the floor of the back alley behind the diner where I'd just scraped gum off the underside of booths for 6 hours straight. And I remember thinking, you're not done yet. Not even close. I picked up 2 more jobs. One as a stocker at a 24-hour grocery store, and another cleaning offices late at night. I was barely sleeping, running on caffeine pills and vending machine coffee, but I didn't care. I was making just enough to cover tuition after grants and scholarships. I ate canned soup with plastic forks, slept on an air mattress in a room I rented in a house full of strangers, and kept a journal under my pillow where I wrote down every name, every insult, every moment I'd been made to feel small. Not because I was bitter, because I needed the reminder. I needed the edge. College wasn't easy. I'd sit in class barely awake, eyes burning, hands calloused from scrubbing toilets and lifting crates. But every time I wanted to quit, I'd think about my father in his crisp white coat, smiling for photos with people who didn't know the kind of man he was. I'd think about my mother pretending she didn't hear the truth when it screamed through the walls. I'd think about the way they looked at me that night, like I was disposable. And then I'd push harder. I learned how to budget every dollar down to the cent, how to study between shifts, how to fake being fine when I was dead inside. But I also learned who I was. Not who they wanted me to be. Not the broken kid kicked out of a picture-perfect home. I learned I was the kind of person who doesn't stay down, who rebuilds from the wreckage, who turns pain into momentum. By the end of that year, I wasn't just surviving. I was becoming someone they couldn't even comprehend. Not the disappointment. Not the mistake. I was independent, hungry, unbreakable. And I never forgot that promise I made myself under that flickering light. Survive, and make them regret ever letting you go. I met Professor Linda Harris during a mandatory seminar my second semester of undergrad, the kind of lecture everyone shows up to half asleep and leaves without remembering a single thing. I was sitting in the back, running on 2 hours of sleep and cheap gas station coffee, trying to keep my eyelids from collapsing under the weight of a 14-hour shift the night before. I wasn't there to learn anything that day. I was just trying to keep my head above water, like always. And then she started speaking. No slides. No notes. Just her voice, sharp, steady, with the kind of calm that made people stop mid-conversation and listen. She didn't talk about textbook definitions or policy frameworks like every other professor I'd met. She told a story. Her story. She talked about living in her car for 2 years. About working graveyard shifts cleaning medical offices while reading Supreme Court opinions under flickering hallway lights. About getting rejected from her first law school because her application looked incomplete. Not because it lacked credentials, but because she didn't have a permanent address. My hand froze over my notebook. I don't even remember picking up the pen, but I started writing, not her words exactly, but the way they made my chest feel like someone had pried it open. I looked around the room. Most people were scrolling their phones, already checked out. But for me, it felt like she was talking directly to me. Like she already knew what it was like to spend nights trying to keep your textbooks dry during rainstorms because you had nowhere else to study. Like she knew what it felt like to be surrounded by people who had parents wiring them rent money while you were folding mops in a janitor's closet trying to figure out how to afford your next meal. After the seminar, I stayed behind. I wasn't even sure what I was going to say, but I couldn't leave without speaking to her. I waited until the crowd thinned out, and when she finally turned and looked at me, I choked. Just stood there for a second, gripping the strap of my backpack like it was the only thing keeping me from falling apart. I must have looked like a wreck. I hadn't shaved in days, my hoodie smelled like bleach, and I could feel my voice cracking before I even opened my mouth. I think I need help, I said. She didn't ask why. She didn't ask for credentials or a transcript. She looked at me the same way you look at someone standing on the edge of a cliff and said, "Good, then let's start." That was the beginning. Linda wasn't the kind of mentor who handed out pity. She didn't lower the bar. She raised it. And then she taught me how to reach it with bloody fingers and a spine that refused to bend. She met me for coffee every other Thursday at this place near campus that let us sit for hours as long as we kept the mugs filled. Sometimes we talked about law, case law, theory, the system, and how it failed people like us. But sometimes we just talked. About survival. About anger. About what it felt like to build a life from the ashes of one that was never really yours to begin with. She helped me get into law school. Not by writing my application for me, God no. Linda made me write it 5 times, tore it apart each time, and handed it back like she was daring me to show her I wanted it more than the excuses. She didn't sugarcoat anything. She said, "This won't be fair. The game isn't built for people like you. You'll be poorer, more tired, and more isolated than everyone in that lecture hall. But if you finish, you'll walk out of that place with fire in your hands. And you'll know exactly where to aim it." She wasn't wrong. Law school near broke me. I worked 3 jobs just to scrape by, bartending at night, delivering groceries on weekends, and tutoring freshmen in writing basics for $10 an hour. There were nights I studied contracts with my feet propped up on the laundry machines at the 24-hour laundromat, because it was the only place that stayed warm after midnight. But I didn't stop. Every time I felt like I was drowning, I'd get a message from Linda, 1 sentence, no fluff. Keep going. Sometimes that was all it took. I graduated top 10%. Passed the bar the first time. Got my first job in a small but vicious public defense office, where I spent my mornings ripping holes in cases built on prejudice and lazy police work, and my nights walking home past the shelter I used to sleep behind. And Linda was there, clapping for me at the swearing-in ceremony like I'd just come back from war. Because in a way, I had. Professor Harris didn't save me. She gave me the tools to save myself. She gave me permission to believe that people like us don't just survive. We become the kind of force that breaks the silence, exposes the rot, and demands something better. I wouldn't be here without her. But more than that, I wouldn't be me without her. The file landed on my desk on a rainy Thursday afternoon, buried under a stack of healthcare compliance reviews and whistleblower memos. I was 3 espressos deep and running on fumes when I finally opened the folder. At first, I skimmed without really seeing. Just another Medicare fraud case, another arrogant white-collar name caught cooking numbers and billing the government for procedures no one needed. But then my eyes landed on the name. James A. Mitchell, MD. I didn't breathe. Not for a second. Not for 10 seconds. And then everything around me. The dull hum of the fluorescent lights, the muffled conversations through the frosted glass, the sound of my own pen tapping against the desk, just disappeared. Dr. James Mitchell. My father. My throat tightened. The air felt heavier. I stared at the name printed in bold across the top of the indictment request and felt something sharp and cold settle in the pit of my stomach. 10 years. 10 years since I'd seen him. 10 years since he threw me out of his life with $500 and the promise that I'd never be anything without him. 10 years of silence, rebuilding, sharpening myself like a weapon in a world that expected me to stay broken. And now, here he was again, delivered to me like a gift from fate wrapped in legalese and sealed with a federal court stamp. I flipped through the report. Fraudulent claims for cardiac diagnostics, ghost patients with falsified procedure codes, billing for surgeries that never happened. A decade of criminal activity hidden under the polish of a respected practice. Classic paper trail arrogance. The kind of crime that wears a suit, shakes hands at charity balls, and thinks it's too sophisticated to ever be caught. He must have thought he was untouchable, that the world would keep looking the other way as long as he wore his white coat and smiled in the right direction. But not this time. Not with me. I requested full oversight on the case. I didn't tell anyone the truth. They knew me as Mitchell, sure, but they assumed no connection. No one asked. No one looked at me and saw a man who had once slept behind a laundromat with his textbooks stuffed under his coat for warmth. No one imagined I'd once stood in front of that same man and been told I was nothing. But I remembered. Every word. Every slap. Every sideways look from my mother as she sipped her wine and pretended her husband's cruelty was just parenting. I buried myself in the case. Pulled every invoice, every audit flag, every insurance report going back 12 years. I mapped out the shell companies, the middlemen, the private clinics he'd funneled money through, most of them under different LLCs, all tied together by sloppy mistakes. Addresses that didn't match, invoices signed with the same stylized J. He wasn't even careful. That was the most insulting part. He thought he was too important to be caught. But I was meticulous. I spent weeks chasing down old patients, nurses who'd left quietly, a billing manager who'd gone into early retirement under suspicious circumstances. Piece by piece, the empire he built on lies started to collapse under the weight of his own arrogance. And the whole time, I never said a word to anyone. I didn't need sympathy. I didn't need drama. I needed results. The first time I saw him again was in a deposition room on the 5th floor of the district courthouse. He walked in wearing that same smug composure he'd always had, the kind of expression that made people trust him without question. But when his eyes landed on me, something shifted. It was quick, just a flicker, like a ghost he hadn't expected to see sitting across the table in a suit, holding his fate in a neat binder marked United States versus James A. Mitchell. He froze. I didn't. I leaned forward and said, "Dr. Mitchell, please state your full name for the record." For a moment, he just stared, like he was trying to process it. And I watched him realize that I hadn't disappeared, that I hadn't crumbled or crawled back, that I'd risen. And worse, I was the one holding the knife now. He cleared his throat. "James Allen Mitchell." My voice didn't waver. "Thank you. Let's begin." And just like that, the balance shifted. 10 years of pain, of silence, of buried truth coiled inside my chest finally unspooled into something clean and surgical. This wasn't vengeance for the sake of anger. This was justice with precision. The kind he never thought I'd be capable of. The kind he never thought I deserved. But I did. Every word. Every page. Every damn nail I drove into the shell of the man who had once stood over me and promised I'd never make it without his name. Turns out, I didn't need it. I only needed the truth. And now, it was finally my turn to speak. Amanda's wedding was held at a vineyard just outside the city, the kind of place that looked like a postcard and smelled like lavender and money. I got the invitation 2 months earlier, hand-addressed, sealed with a gold foil monogram that still felt surreal to open. For a long time, I didn't know if I'd go. Not because I didn't want to see her. God, I missed her, but because I knew who else would be there. And I didn't know if I was ready to stand 10 feet from the people who once looked me in the eye and pretended I didn't exist. But I owed her this. Amanda had always been the only one who tried to see me, even when the house was falling apart around us. So I rented the suit, ironed it 3 times, and drove out there in silence, heart pounding the closer I got. When I arrived, the sun was just starting to dip, casting everything in that cinematic gold light that makes even pain look romantic. People laughed and mingled with champagne in their hands, heels sinking into the grass, and for a second, I stood there in the parking lot, hands clenched, breathing slow, just trying to keep it together. Then I saw her. Amanda. She looked like something pulled from another life, elegant, radiant, and completely unrecognizable in the best possible way. But when her eyes met mine across the crowd, everything else blurred out. She didn't hesitate. She didn't second-guess. She ran to me, full dress and all, nearly tripping over someone's bouquet. She wrapped her arms around me so tight I could barely breathe. "You came," she whispered into my shoulder. I felt her shaking. "I told you I would." She pulled back, eyes wet, smile trembling. "I didn't think you would. I wasn't sure if." Her voice cracked, and she looked away. "It's okay," I said. "I'm here now." And for a few minutes, it was just us. The world faded. She gave me a quick tour of the reception layout like it mattered, like we were just siblings again, and nothing had happened. I followed, nodded, pretended it was easy. Then I saw them. They stood near the bar, surrounded by old friends and relatives, all polished smiles and practiced posture. My father hadn't changed. Still upright, still cold, still looking through people instead of at them. My mother was thinner, paler, her hair shorter and styled softer than I remembered, but it was her eyes that stopped me. They weren't glassy anymore. They were tired, gutted. She looked like a woman losing something slowly, piece by piece, and too proud to ask for help. Amanda noticed. "They didn't know you'd come," she said quietly. I didn't answer. "They wouldn't have come if they thought you would." But I didn't care. "I wanted you there." I nodded. "You knew they'd lose it." "I didn't care," she said again, sharper this time. Later, during the cocktail hour, I saw him walking toward me. My father, James Mitchell, in all his aging arrogance. We stood there in the middle of the garden, 2 statues carved from the same stone, but chipped in completely different ways. He stopped just short of me, hands in his pockets like he had every right to speak. "You're still using my name," he said flatly. I let the silence stretch. "You think this is a game?" he asked, voice low, controlled. "Dragging your personal drama into our family's business, into this wedding." I stepped forward until there was almost no space left. "You don't get to say family, like it includes me. You made sure of that." His jaw tightened. "I did what I had to do." "No," I said. "You did what was easiest for you. Like always." We didn't speak after that. He turned and walked away without another word. That was the closest we'd come to closure. It was later in the evening, after the dancing started, that I found my mother sitting alone under the canopy of lights strung over the lawn. A glass of untouched champagne in front of her. She didn't look surprised when I sat down. "You've grown up," she said quietly. "I didn't really have a choice." She nodded. I still focused on something I couldn't see. "I was diagnosed last winter," she said, still not looking at me. "Stage 4. Liver." I didn't say anything. I couldn't. I kept thinking if I ignored it long enough, it would go away. Like everything else. I finally spoke. "I'm sorry." She turned toward me then, and for the first time in years, her expression wasn't distant. It wasn't guarded or painted over with wine and silence. It was just sad. I failed you, she said. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't enough. But it was the closest thing she'd ever given me. And somehow, I didn't feel angry. Just hollow. Amanda found me again before I left. We stood behind the reception tent while people toasted to her new life, and the music thumped behind us like a heartbeat. I tried to find you, she said suddenly, out of nowhere. After they kicked you out, I searched everywhere. I even hired someone online to look. I stared at her. Why didn't you say anything? They told me you were gone, that you didn't want to be found, that you, she swallowed hard, wanted nothing to do with me. I didn't believe them, but I didn't know what else to do. I stepped forward and hugged her again, tighter this time. You didn't fail me, I whispered. You were the only part of that house that ever made sense. We didn't talk about what came next. We didn't need to. The truth had already been cracked open and left out in the open air. All that mattered was that she had found her way back to me, and that I had finally come home, not to them, but to her. I didn't plan to speak. I told Amanda I wouldn't. I meant it when I said this day was hers. But when I stood there in the crowd, watching him sip champagne like he wasn't the reason I'd spent years clawing my way back from the edge, something inside me shifted. My hands were cold, but my chest was burning. I watched him laugh at some uncle's joke, one hand in his blazer pocket, the other resting on the back of my mother's chair like he still owned the room. Like none of it ever touched him. Like he was still Dr. James Mitchell, respected, applauded, untouchable. The toasts began, one after another. Amanda's best friend, the groom's brother, then their college roommate who cried so hard no one understood half of what she said. Then the mic was passed around, drifting from guest to guest. And when it reached me, I felt every eye on my back. Amanda looked at me. No pressure, just a silent nod. Her way of saying, whatever happens next, I see you. I stood up slowly. The mic felt heavier than it should have. The night air was warm, but my skin prickled like it was snowing. Hi, I said, steady, clear. I wasn't going to say anything tonight. I told Amanda I wouldn't. But I think it's time. The crowd stilled. Forks paused midair. Conversations cut mid-laugh. I want to tell you a story, I continued. It's about a boy who grew up in a house where everything looked perfect from the outside, where the lawn was trimmed, the plates were china, and the family photos hung on every hallway like a shrine to order. But inside that house was silence, fear, and secrets that sat like rot beneath polished floors. My father shifted in his seat. The boy learned early that truth wasn't welcome in that house. That loyalty meant swallowing lies whole. That love came with conditions and threats. And when that boy tried to speak, he was thrown out, told he was worthless, told he'd never survive without the name Mitchell behind him. The room was dead quiet now. No clinking glass, no background chatter. Just breath, tension, stillness. I looked directly at my father. You were wrong. His eyes met mine. Cold, blank. But I saw it. The twitch in his jaw, the way he leaned forward, fingers curling against his knee. I survived. I went to school. I became an attorney. And I spent the last 2 years investigating a Medicare fraud scheme tied to shell companies, falsified procedure reports, and criminal billing practices totaling over $3 million in theft. And the man behind that scheme, the man who signed every fraudulent document, who orchestrated every kickback and cover-up, is sitting right there at table 6. Gasps erupted. A few people turned, some too stunned to process. My father rose to his feet. This is slander, he barked. You're out of your... Not slander, I said, raising a small leather folder and opening it slowly. Documented, audited, witness statements, forensic accounting, depositions, and subpoenas. The murmurs rose now like a wave. People whispering, backing away. Amanda stood up, eyes wide, hand over her mouth. And tonight, I continued, voice unwavering, isn't just a wedding. It's justice. That's when the agents stepped forward. Plain clothes until they weren't, badges flashing, voices firm. Dr. James Mitchell, one of them said over the hum of disbelief. You're under arrest for conspiracy to commit healthcare fraud, wire fraud, and obstruction of justice. The sound of handcuffs closing around his wrists was quieter than I thought it would be. No shouting, no struggle, just my father, shoulders stiff, lips pressed tight, eyes fixed somewhere above me like he could stare his way out of what was happening. My mother didn't stand. She just sat frozen in her chair, wineglass trembling in her hand. Amanda walked over. Slowly, quietly. She took my hand, her eyes glistening but clear. You did it, she whispered. I looked back at her, the mic still in my hand, and nodded. I told the truth. After the dust had settled and the weight of years finally lifted, I sat in my new apartment with a box of unopened envelopes in my lap, each one stained slightly from age and humidity, each one bearing the unmistakable handwriting of my mother and Amanda. They had written to me, letters filled with apologies, confessions, grief, and longing, but none of them had ever reached me. My father had hidden them, stashing them somewhere in that cursed house like sins tucked beneath polished floorboards. When I opened them, one by one, I felt my chest tighten with every word. My mother's tone shifted from denial to sorrow, her once glossy pride cracking with guilt as she described waking up from the stupor of her delusions too late. She'd written about nights she sat on the balcony, clutching a glass of wine and whispering my name into the wind, knowing she had pushed away the only person who had the courage to speak the truth. Amanda's letters, though fewer, were saturated with desperation, pleading to find me, telling me that she'd searched, that she had never stopped believing me, never stopped missing me. By the time I laid them all out across my bed, tears had started pooling under my chin, not from sadness alone, but from the jagged edges of lost time. For years, I had walked around with the conviction that I had been utterly alone, that no one had reached out, that my sister had chosen silence, and that my mother had chosen loyalty to a monster over love for her child. And now, after everything, after the courtroom hearings, the mugshots, the FBI reports, the wedding confrontation, the hush in the reception hall after my confession, now I learned that the silence wasn't neglect. It was sabotage. Amanda and I met for coffee the day after the wedding. No white dresses or champagne this time. Just two siblings who had crawled through the wreckage of a family's lies and still somehow found each other on the other side. She brought a folder of her own, photocopies of missing persons reports she'd filed in college, records of social media messages she'd sent to people who might have known where I'd gone, screenshots of emails returned unopened. She said she hated herself for not doing more, for believing our father when he said I had run away, bitter and unstable. But I didn't hate her. I couldn't. Because through everything, Amanda had been the only person who ever made that house feel like home. We talked for hours, no longer shielded by the illusions of wealth or family image. We talked like survivors of the same fire, no longer pretending it hadn't scorched every part of our past. And slowly, through halting conversations and unsent letters finally read, we began piecing together something real, not built on secrets, not reinforced by fear or shame, but grounded in truth, in resilience, in the shared ache of being children in a house that always felt more like a stage set than a sanctuary. So here we are now. No grand reconciliation, no fairy tale ribbon tied around the end of it all, but something more honest. Amanda comes over for dinner every Sunday. We talk about mom sometimes, when we can bear it. I keep a framed photo of us as kids on my desk, taken before everything unraveled, as a reminder of what we almost lost and what we refused to let go of. I told my truth.